Well, for more on the developments in Brazil, we're joined by Andrea Murta. She's Associate Director of the Andrea Murta Latin America Center. Andrea, thanks so much for joining us. First of all, do you think the PMDB gave up on Rousseff because they believe she and her party are guilty, or because they've just become too much of a political liability because of the endless chain of corruption charges?
I think it's a combination of both. But this move doesn't come as a surprise to anyone that's following the Brazilian developments recently. There has been a slow and gradual abandonment of the government by the PMDB and by several other parties that used to be part of the coalition. And they just see the government as too much of a risk to stay on right now, particularly if they're fighting for survival in the middle of a very polarized and very difficult situation for the political system in Brazil in general.
But the Workers' Party has had staunch support from Brazil's lower and middle classes in particular. Where does that stand now? Do they see a better alternative out there, or will they stand by their party?
Well, parts of it are still standing by. So the Labour Party, the PT party, it still has a strong hold on certain social movements, on labor unions, and on other people that in Brazil are very concerned about how the impeachment proceedings are going forward. And with the general corruption that they see, that's just not part of one single government, but part of a system. But on the other hand, that support has been dwindling. And we see day after day the numbers of people that support the impeachment of the president, they are getting much higher in Brazil. In less than a month, they went from 60 to almost 70%, for example. It's going to be very hard for the president to stay in power, especially after the PMDB left the government coalition today. So,
Andrea, I have to ask you, one of the accusations against the government is that it granted FIFA tax-free status during the 2010 World Cup. 2014 World Cup. Now, as we're discovering, a country either had to grant so-called concessions or it wasn't granted the World Cup. Do you think the public might be more forgiving when it comes to those claims against the government?
I don't think so. I think the Brazilian public is not forgiving of anything at the moment. Corruption is not new in Brazil. It has been, unfortunately, part of the system for decades. And it's just a growing intolerance with the way that things are usually done between the promiscuity between the government and the political parties and large companies in Brazil, the way that things just seem to be part of a very corrupt system in general that is engulfing everyone that is in power. The population is not tolerating that very well anymore, certainly a lot less than they used to. And I think every new accusation that's coming forward this past few months has just thrown more into the fire, and people are really angry in Brazil.
So, Andrea, what about the economy then? Would removal of Rousseff from power help or hurt?
In the short term, it's possible that it would help, just because it would put some new coalition in power that has every interest to pass reforms that are deeply needed in the country, and that people would maybe, the people that are in power, stop maneuvering so much to assure their own survival and try to show to the Brazilian public that they can actually promote some of the changes that the country needs. But everyone almost agrees that this will be short-lived, because the problems that Brazil is facing right now, they weren't just created yesterday. They are not going to be solved by removing the president from power. They are structural problems that are going to demand very long-term efforts and very deep reforms to solve. So this is not a situation that's going to be solved in a year or two. This is a long-term proposition, and everyone will feel that whether or not Dilma is removed from power.
So in the short term then, Andrea, who in the political structure in Brazil might cynically benefit from all of this?
Well, that's a big question right now. So it's not just who will benefit, but who has the legitimacy to take the control of the country, to take the reins of the political system and move the country forward right now. So what we see in Brazil with the impeachment, including with these proceedings, is not just a quest for cleaning the country, but also a quest for survival. So all these parties that have been in power for a long time in Brazil, the other parties that were members of the coalition, as well as the opposition, they are all all involved in some level into these corruption investigations that are going on, and they're all trying to assure their own survival. The quest for impeachment at this point looks a lot more like an attempt to maintain a system that is deeply flawed than an attempt to change the way that things are done in Brazil, and that is deeply concerning.
Okay, Andrea, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for sharing your insight live from Washington.